Shalom, Erev Tov, Willkommen, welcome to our first Israeli-European Media Summit from Tel Aviv. A new generation, new media, new bridges from wherever you are joining us. Jenny Havemann,
Susanne Glass.
We are so happy to connect journalists, politicians, companies, organizations, startups from Israel and Europe in online discussions.
We will focus on how can journalists cover Israel-related topics adequately? How do anti-Semitism, Holocaust, and social media influence their news coverage? And which innovations and which startups can help the media outlets dealing with hate speech and fake news?
Jenny, should we tell how we both met?
Yeah, sure.
We met over an argument on Twitter concerning some media coverage about Israel. I invited Jenny to a coffee here into the ARD-Studio to continue our discussion in a deeper manner. And actually, this is how we became friends.
True.
And believe me, we still are discussing very controversially about a lot of topics, but this is inspiring and important. And this is also the whole idea behind this summit. We strongly believe that especially in these challenging times, we all should engage ourselves into debates and discussions.
And the Media Summit Tel Aviv was supposed to be in March this year. And we're 5 months late, which is even a lot for Israelis. And when we founded this project, we wanted to be an offline connecting meeting point here in Tel Aviv with a great venue, with amazing Israeli food, with special evening events to build bridges, personal bridges between Europe and Israel. But then Corona happened and international conferences were made illegal for good reason. But we could have postponed the summit, but we decided that the topics are too important to be postponed. So we decided that we'll do the first European-Israeli Media Summit online. And we thank our partners and our sponsors and supporters that they supported our decision. You can find all of them on our website. But the main supporters of this summit are the Federal Foreign Office of Germany, World Jewish Congress, Bertelsmann Stiftung, and Zukunftsfonds of the Republic of Austria.
And I want to mention the Bavarian broadcasting station, the Bayerische Rundfunk in Munich, which is running this ARD-Studio in Tel Aviv. I would like to thank all my colleagues here in Israel and in Munich, and especially the technical experts who made this online conference happen.
And we would like to thank our partners from the Jerusalem Press Club and also going with us through the stormy Corona times to make this project happen. And today the JPC is represented by Dan Meridor. He's an Israeli politician and he is the advisory board chairman of the Jerusalem Press Club. Please, Dan, we would love to hear your opening remarks.
Good evening, Erev Tov from Jerusalem. Guten Abend from Jerusalem. I am happy to congratulate this event and just few remarks that I would like to add. We live in a time of crisis. I mean, technology has changed and is still changing our life very rapidly in many areas: economy, culture, international relationships, security. And in times of such rapid change, it is of great importance to be able to understand in time what is changing and to adapt yourself to give answers to challenges that are new. One of the big changes has to do with information. Technology has allowed everyone to know almost everything. Never in human history was so much accessible to so many people. You can sit with your smartphone on an island somewhere and you can know everything. You don't need to go to Oxford or Cambridge or Sorbonne or whatever other university. You have it. It sounds wonderful. People became very powerful. I think it was Tom Friedman of the New York Times who spoke of the empowerment of individuals, super empowered individuals. People can do a lot. And regarding information flows now, and everybody can get whatever he wants on the web, and everyone can disseminate what he wants to say to others. It sounds great, a paradise of free speech, great times for democracy. There's the rub, here's the problem. When everybody can talk, and they do, and the discourse sometimes very shallow because people don't have enough time to listen and to think thoroughly, you sometimes don't know what is true and what is not true. The industry of fake news, or what was once called alternative facts, I remember on the American election campaign, I have alternative facts. It leaves the individual embarrassed. How do I know what is right, what is wrong? What is true, what is untrue? If everybody talks, which is great, there is no editor, like in a paper or in a television mechanism, and everybody can say what he wants, and you don't know what is true and what is untrue. This is very dangerous to democracy, among other things. It raises the question of journalism and media. The word media has to do with medium, comes in the middle, into the intermediary between the leadership and the people, those who want to disseminate news, and the people. There was a paper, there were journalists, and you wouldn't do certain things if they don't pass certain criteria. Now there is no editor. Nobody decides what is important, what is not. And sometimes people find themselves very embarrassed. And the bad guys can make good use of this new jungle of free speech. So this poses a huge task, a challenge. Is there ethics on journalists? Maybe, but is every Twitter guy a journalist? Everybody can talk. What is the ethics? Who can find out whether it is right or wrong? We speak here at this conference on anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, the massacre of the Jews in Europe 80 or 75 years ago. This is a fact that we know. I was born 2 years after the end of the Second World War, so I hadn't witnessed it myself, although I have to admit that all my life I feel I might have been there. I still remember in my midst people with numbers on their arms. I knew the stories, I knew the people. How do we make these things accessible to people today, what they call now Generation Z? I don't know exactly what it is, but sometimes younger people are called this way. How do we tell them the story? All this is a big challenge. It's not a challenge to be coped with just by governments. It's everybody is involved, the media, the governments, other agencies, educators. This is why I very much welcome this seminar of 3 days, because everybody is affected. Everybody should think of it, open his head, forget the old paradigm. It's not there, it's a new paradigm, and try to discuss thoroughly and decently and honestly and see what are the limits of free speech. Should there be limits, or everything is right? How do we do that? What are the mechanisms? And if we do that right, I hope we'll benefit our society, which is not a national society, it's a global society now. So welcome all the organizers, and here from Jerusalem, in the name of the Jerusalem Press Club that tries to educate as much as we can in that direction, I welcome the opening of this seminar. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan, and the Jerusalem Press Club. Very important supporters from the beginning were the ambassadors of Germany, Austria, and Switzerland in Israel. They were fabulous, and they're doing a great job here. So I'm very happy to present now the German ambassador Susanne Glass for her greetings and opening remarks.
So thank you very much. I'm very happy indeed that the Startup Media Summit Tel Aviv is finally taking place. The summit was, as it was already said, one of the first international conferences which had to be postponed due to the emerging pandemic back in March. all of a sudden normal things that we took for granted, like traveling from Europe to Israel to participate in such meeting, became impossible. The German government has supported the idea of holding this media summit ever since its inception. The Federal Foreign Office has contributed significant funding, 20,000 euros, to make this conference happen. And the German embassy in Tel Aviv has also accompanied the process of conceptualizing and putting the initial idea into practice. We are very, very grateful for the good cooperation with the organizers of the Media Summit. Thank you, Susanne Glass and Jenny Havemann, for your tremendous efforts to make this happen. And if I may add, I would like to express my admiration for the perseverance with which you pursued against all odds the goals of this conference. The fact that it is now taking place in the virtual sphere underlines the very significance of the topics at stake. The digital sphere has grown tremendously ever since day one of the COVID crisis. With this ever increasing weight of digital media come opportunities, many opportunities. For example, as it was already mentioned by Dan Meridor, the multitude of this year's Yom HaShoah ceremonies has underlined the potential of remembrance in the digital sphere. I'm looking forward to our discussions in the coming days on how to pass the lessons from the past to the young generation, making use of modern, attractive digital means. But as the conference title points out, we are also confronted with challenges, major challenges in the digital sphere. Racism, anti-Semitism, hate speech spread easily and all too often with real consequences. And the pandemic has but accelerated this worrisome trend. Germany is currently holding the presidency of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IRA. And in this capacity, fighting distortion and denial of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, also in the digital sphere, is one of our main priorities. It is said that the public media are like the fourth power in democracies. And I'm glad that the conference sheds light on both the opportunities and the risks that this bears, and that it raises awareness for the digital media's responsibility as part of the democratic discourse. As I said, the German government attaches a great importance to this conference, as it is also reflected in the high-level participation. Like, for instance, tomorrow, Federal Foreign Minister Heiko Maas will speak at this conference, and further distinguished speakers from Germany will be part of it. Dialogue across the borders matters even more when traveling becomes difficult. We strongly believe that bringing together media practitioners and professionals from Europe and Israel has a value in itself. I hope that this may be a start for a continued exchange between media professionals from Europe and Israel. And I wish all of us a very successful conference and a very fruitful dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ambassador. And now please welcome the Ambassador of Austria, Hanna Liko, with her opening remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to join you at this first Startup Media Tel Aviv Summit. As Austrian ambassador, I have been following with great interest the success story of the European Media Summit that takes place every year in Lech in Austria, and which has developed into an indispensable platform to discuss European politics. I am convinced that the Tel Aviv Media Summit will be equally successful. I'm also proud that the Austrian Embassy and other Austrian institutions, above all, the Austrian Future Fund, are supporting this project. And let me also stress that I admire the organizers of the summit who made it happen despite the difficult circumstances. The themes of the summit are very pertinent and might have become even more relevant in the past months. I do believe that the pandemic has accelerated many trends, such as the spread of hate speech and fake news on social media. Recently, we have also seen the rise of anti-Semitism across the world. Only a few weeks ago, we have witnessed attacks against the synagogue of Graz in Austria, and even a physical attack against the president of the Jewish community of Graz. Really enough to step up efforts to combat anti-Semitism even further. There are several initiatives that the Austrian government is undertaking in this regard. Let me just give you 3 examples. In a few weeks, Federal Minister Caroline Edstadler will present an action plan against anti-Semitism with approximately 30 concrete measures in the fields of education, research, and security. And there will be a specific unit in the Federal Chancellery that will be in charge of implementing these measures. Justice Minister Alma Sadic has announced that she will tighten up the Verbotsgesetz. This is the law forbidding Nazi activity and Holocaust denial. The aim of this initiative is to close gaps such as partial Holocaust denial. The government is also preparing a series of laws combating hate speech on the internet. The aim is to require large social media platforms such as Facebook and YouTube to delete inflammatory and abusive comments, and it also imposes considerable fines if they don't. Austrian Foreign Minister Alexander Schallenberg will join us tomorrow for a keynote, and I'm sure we will learn more about these initiatives. So I'm looking forward to the discussions and wish you lots of success.
Thank you very much, Hanna Liko, Mrs. Ambassador. We are also looking forward to the discussions. But last but not least, we want to hear now the Swiss Ambassador, Jean-Daniel Ruch, please.
Thank you very much. It is my turn now to congratulate the organizer and to express my admiration for having been able to bring about this important project despite the difficult circumstances. Congratulations to Susanne Glass and to all of you. Anti-Semitism and xenophobia are on the rise everywhere in the Western world, including in Switzerland. We are no exception to this. Not surprisingly, this goes together with the rise of far-right speeches and hate discourses, who have found powerful vectors in the social media. Generation Z is the prime target, also because that generation is less interested, just not reading traditional media or watching television. The challenge for all of us is therefore threefold. First, create the education tools that can effectively combat racism and anti-Semitism at school, with a special focus, of course, on the denial of the Holocaust. Second, stop the social media from being the super spreader of those viruses that produce xenophobia and anti-Semitism. Third, at the same time, to preserve a healthy democratic space where opinions can be freely expressed and debate can take place. The targets of hate speech are not only the usual victim groups like Jews, Muslims, or Black people. Often the attacks aim also at those supporting coexistence. There are allegations that the recent fire incident in Neve Shalom, an outstanding community proving that coexistence between Jews and Arabs works may be hate crimes. We, of course, count on the police investigation to shed all light on those suspicions. However, here, like in Europe and elsewhere in the world, the challenges of coexistence are becoming more acute. I count on this conference to offer us avenues on how to better tackle these crucial issues with the new generation. Allow me to conclude by quoting my old friend, the top-class Swiss cartoonist Patrick Chapat, who wrote a landmark opinion piece in June 2019 after the New York Times renounced to publish cartoons, including his own, terminating 20 years of collaboration. We are in a world, he wrote, where moralistic mobs gather on social media and rise like a storm, falling upon newsrooms in an overwhelming blow. This requires immediate countermeasures by publishers, leaving no room for ponderation or meaningful discussions. Twitter is a place for fury, not debate. The most outraged voices tend to define the conversation, and the angry crowd follows in. And then he concludes, political cartoons were born with democracy, and they are challenged where freedom is. I think we can all agree that a common duty is to protect both freedom and democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Ruch. Here I have to excuse the mayor of Tel Aviv, Ron Huldai, who cannot join due to timing reasons, but the city of Tel Aviv will be prominently represented on the third day of our summit. Now, der Intendant des Bayerischen Rundfunks, the director of the Bavarian Broadcasting Station, Ulrich Wilhelm, will share with us his thoughts about these very important topics.
Ich freue mich sehr, dass dieses wichtige Forum nun stattfinden kann. Der erste europäisch-israelische Mediengipfel mit einer besonderen Unterstützung auch durch unser ARD-Studio Tel Aviv ist eine sehr wichtige Veranstaltung. Viele der Probleme, mit denen Sie sich befassen werden, die Sie genauer untersuchen werden, sind von großer Bedeutung weit über Deutschland und Israel hinaus, weit auch über Europa hinaus. Die Polarisierung in der politischen Debatte in vielen freien Gesellschaften, die besorgniserregende Zunahme von Hassrede und Desinformation als Mittel im politischen Meinungskampf und nicht zuletzt ein alarmierend wachsender Antisemitismus und Judenhass sind Themen, die den Journalismus, die publizistische Verantwortung herausfordern. Wir müssen uns überall in den Redaktionen den Themen stellen. Wie gehen wir um mit Quellen? Wie können wir die Sorgfalt der Recherche, die Seriosität unserer Berichte sicherstellen? Wie können wir Medienkompetenz aufbauen, auch in der publizistischen Community? Wie können wir nicht zuletzt auch immer wieder die Maßstäbe im Umgang mit sozialen Medien schärfen und im Lichte neuerer Erkenntnisse und Entwicklungen verändern? Unser Haus hat sich sehr engagiert auch in der Frage, ob Europa für seine digitale Souveränität nicht auch eine eigene digitale Infrastruktur braucht, in Ergänzung zu den Lösungen, die amerikanische große Unternehmen bieten, die zunehmend auch von chinesischen Anbietern kommen. Die Werte, die Europa sich gegeben hat, nach langen schmerzlichen Erfahrungen in der Geschichte, Toleranz, Menschenrechte, Rechtsstaatlichkeit, Achtung demokratischer Prinzipien, müssen auch in der Technik stärker verankert sein. Sie müssen sich auch der demokratischen Kontrolle stellen. Wenn Foren der politischen Diskussion allein auf Geschäftsmodellen von kommerziellen Anbietern beruhen, die niemals diese Aspekte im Blick hatten, sondern in erster Linie die Optimierung von Werbebudgets oder das Gliedern nach Gruppen von Gleichgesinnten, dann hat das negative Auswirkungen auf die politische Diskussion in Form der Polarisierung, wie wir sie überall beklagen. Europa muss hier Initiativen ergreifen und kann auf die exzellenten Erfahrungen gerade auch israelischer Start-up-Unternehmen, auf das hohe technologische Können, das Israel vorweisen kann und immer wieder neu entwickelt, natürlich zurückgreifen. Für uns ist es von besonderer Bedeutung, auch als ARD, auch als Bayerischer Rundfunk, der dieses Studio seit 55 Jahren mit großem Stolz und großem Engagement trägt, von großer Bedeutung, dass wir die publizistischen Maßstäbe immer wieder sorgfältig überprüfen, dass wir den Austausch suchen mit vielen Kolleginnen und Kollegen in der Welt, dass wir Veranstaltungen wie diesen ersten israelisch-europäischen Mediengipfel auch nutzen, um uns immer wieder selber zu überprüfen, um in Rede und Gegenrede kluge Maßstäbe für seriöses Berichten und eine publizistische Verantwortung immer wieder neu zu definieren. In diesem Sinne wünsche ich Ihnen allen fruchtbare Diskussionen, einen spannenden Austausch und ich bin sicher, dass daraus weitere Impulse entstehen werden, die gerade auch Europa und Israel und die Bundesrepublik weiter zusammenführen werden.
Thank you, Mr. Wilhelm. And now we would like to welcome one of the most important Jewish voices of our time. She's the president of the Israelitische Kultusgemeinde of München and Oberbayern, Charlotte Knobloch, with her opening remarks.
Sehr geehrte Frau Glass, sehr geehrte Frau Havemann, sehr geehrte Frau Botschafterin Basom-Reiner, sehr geehrte Frau Botschafterin Liko, sehr geehrter Herr Botschafter Ruch, sehr geehrter Herr Bürgermeister Huldayi, sehr geehrter Herr Meridor, sehr geehrter Herr Wilhelm, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, es ist mir eine große Ehre und Freude, dass ich zur Eröffnung des Online Media Summit zu Ihnen sprechen kann. Wie alle anderen hätte auch ich das lieber in persona getan, vor Ort, in Israel, offen, persönlich und gemeinsam. Das war heuer leider nicht möglich. Umso dankbarer bin ich aber dem Organisationsteam, dass die Konferenz stattdessen im digitalen Raum stattfinden kann. Das ist keine geringe Leistung. Vor allem aber ist dies auch wichtig, der Future-Diskurs, also die Frage, wie in den kommenden Jahren und Jahrzehnten über die Bekämpfung von Antisemitismus und Hate Speech gesprochen wird, darf nicht erst dann geklärt werden, wenn es zu spät ist. Schon die letzten Jahre haben schließlich gezeigt, wie schnell und wie dramatisch sich die öffentliche Debatte online wie offline zuspitzen kann. Wer hätte vor 10 Jahren geglaubt, dass im Jahr 2020 eine offen rechtsextreme Partei im Bundestag sitzt, dass Menschen bei Anschlägen auf Synagogen mitten in Deutschland ums Leben kommen und dass die sozialen Medien, die doch eigentlich die Debatte öffnen und bereichern wollten, zu einer Petrischale von Hass und Extremismus aller Art werden würden. So wenig wie ein Beobachter sich all das vor 10 Jahren hätte vorstellen können, so wenig mögen wir uns heute ausmalen, wie die Welt des Jahres 2030 aussehen wird. Was wir aber schon heute wissen, ist dies: Es gibt Herausforderungen, die angegangen werden müssen. Wir alle haben es in der Hand. Zu den wichtigsten Themen, die die kommenden Jahre bestimmen werden, gehört für mich die Frage nach einer gesellschaftlichen und medialen Strategie für das Gedenken in einer Zeit, in der es immer weniger Zeitzeugen gibt. Schon heute zählen die Leugnung, Relativierung oder Instrumentalisierung des Holocaust zu den wichtigsten Motiven rechtsextremer Propaganda. Sie verbreiten sich auch und gerade in den sozialen Medien mit großer Geschwindigkeit. Was für viele Menschen erlebte und vor allem erlittene Geschichte ist, wird heute kleingeredet, rundheraus abgestritten oder sogar als Vorwurf gegen die Überlebenden gewendet. Diese Entwicklung ist sowohl Voraussetzung als auch Folge der zunehmenden Ausbreitung rechtsradikaler und rechtsextremer Ansichten in unserer Gesellschaft. Wir müssen darüber sprechen, wie in Zeiten einer so aufgehetzten Debatte das Wissen um die Vergangenheit erfolgreich vermittelt werden kann. Diese Konferenz, die genau dafür eine Vielzahl kluger Köpfe versammelt hat, kann ein Anfang sein auf dem Weg hin zu den New Approaches, die wir heute dringender brauchen denn je. Denn eines ist sicher, junge Menschen haben auch in Zukunft ein Recht auf die Wahrheit. Sie haben ein Recht darauf, die Geschichte kennenzulernen. Und sie haben, wie wir alle, die Verantwortung, dafür zu sorgen, dass sie sich nicht wiederholt. Sie müssen verstehen, faktenbasiert und emotional. Sie müssen einen Bezug zu sich selbst herstellen können. Ich glaube und hoffe, dass es uns gelingen wird, das Gedenken auch weiter in die Zukunft zu tragen. Keine Gesellschaft, die ihre Vergangenheit ignoriert oder leugnet, hat eine Zukunft. Wer Wissen durch Hass und Verantwortungsbewusstsein, durch Teilnahmslosigkeit ersetzt, der wird Freiheit und Demokratie nicht erhalten können. Ich hoffe deshalb sehr, dass wir alle hier im digitalen Raum, wie auch in unseren Heimatorten, dieser Herausforderung gerecht werden können. Diese Konferenz kann auf dem Weg dahin einen großen Schritt bedeuten. Ich danke daher noch einmal den Organisatoren von ganzem Herzen für ihren Einsatz, ihre Kraft und ihre Hingabe. Und ich wünsche uns allen interessante Vorträge, gute Gedanken und trotz des Formats auch inspirierende Gespräche. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Danke, Frau Präsidentin Knobloch. Your voice and your initiatives are so important. The President of the State of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, has sent us a letter which we proudly present now.
Dear friends, it is a great pleasure to be with you, even if it is from afar, at the opening of this important conference on how we shape the discourse on racism, anti-Semitism and hate speech. I would like to thank all those who are ensuring these important subjects are part of the conversation and that they remain on the public agenda. At the beginning of this year, before we were consumed with the coronavirus pandemic which has disrupted our lives so fundamentally, I was proud to host events commemorating the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. With more than 50 leaders from around the world, we stood together in solemn memory of the victims of the Holocaust and of Nazi aggression, and underlined our shared commitment to fighting racism, discrimination and xenophobia in all its forms wherever it raises its ugly head around our world. As the title of your summit says, racism, anti-Semitism and hate speech are not only matters for remembrance and commemoration. These scourges did not disappear even when we learned the full extent of the Nazi campaign of genocide against our people and against others. Today, as we witness the inexorable rise of hate speech in our political and social discourse, we must not only be alert to it, we must take action to prevent it, educating our young people about its destructive effects and ensuring they, too, know how terrifyingly quickly hate speech can turn into hate crimes. These are times when we must set clear red lines, offering no excuses and no compromises when it comes to racism, discrimination or xenophobia of any kind in any form. Friends, it's good to know that we are not alone. Racism and anti-Semitism are not a problem only for the Jewish people. This is a battle we must face and win together. The participation of my friends, the Austrian, German and Israeli foreign ministers, as well as a distinguished gathering of practitioners and analysts from Israel and Europe, indicates you are ready for action, not just words. Important initiatives, such as Eva's story, as well as the continued need to hear first-hand testimony from Holocaust survivors for as long as we are able can do much to change the discourse. Let me wish you a successful and productive conference. Your work together has never been more urgent or more important. Warmest greetings from Jerusalem, Reuven Rivlin.
We appreciate this letter. If some of you thought I know the voice, you may be right. It was not the president himself, of course, but it was the presidential voice of my radio colleague here in Tel Aviv, Benjamin Hammer.
And now we're going on a short break, and we'll be back in about 6 minutes with a presentation of Eva's story. Not only I am very active on Instagram, but also for the generations Y and Z, Instagram has become a daily companion. And Eva's story, the project, is so important to teach the young generation about what happened during the Holocaust. And Mati Kochavi and his daughter Maya Kochavi are the founders of this project. And Mati Kochavi, he's a leading entrepreneur and investor, and he will now present this project to us.
Hi, my name's Eva. Welcome to my page. Follow me. This is my page for random thoughts, crushes, my hashtag BFFs. One day, I'll be a famous reporter. But for now, I live with my grandparents.
Now you make a wish?
Dirty Jew. Hitler conquered us. Like that. We have to go back immediately. Jews can no longer own businesses.
From today, I must document everything that happens to us.
Eva was 13 years old in 1944 when she was sent to Auschwitz from Hungary, after Hungary was captured by the Nazis. Eva had a special dream. She wanted to be a journalist. Actually, she wanted to be a photographer. And she always wanted to move to London and to do important things and to have an impact on the world. And she did have an impact on the world. Maybe we can see it right now.
הסטורי של אווה.
Eva Hayman.
Eva Hayman.
Eva Hayman.
Eva Hayman.
Eva Hayman is the new face.
De photo qui s'appelle Eva Stories. Stories של Eva.
הסטורי של אווה הפך לתופעה מטורפת, 100 מיליון צופים ב-14-15 שעות.
Imagine, if you will, Instagram existed back then. Right now, a group of talented filmmakers, actors, and producers is bringing to life the real story of teenager Eva Hayman up until she was sent to Auschwitz and murdered.
תארו לכם שהיה אז אינסטגרם, איך היה נראה הסטורי של אווה היימן בחודשים האחרונים לחייה.
The first of these Instagram stories is about to be posted in just a few minutes.
Hey, my name's Eva. Welcome to my life.
In the last 24 hours, it's had over 100 million views.
On December It was 75 years after Auschwitz was released. And during that day, more than 20 world leaders sent Eva a message. They wrote Eva a personal message, among them leaders like the leader of Germany, the president of Germany, President Putin, President Trump, the leaders of Austria, Hungary, and others. And I was thinking to myself, imagine I would been able to see Eva 1 minute before she was murdered in Auschwitz. And I would have told her, Eva, I won't be able to save your life. But 75 years after today, leaders of all the world are going to write you. The leader of Germany, and the leader of Russia, and the leader of America, all of them are going to send you a message, and they're going to all promise never again. This sounds like an unbelievable and impossible story if I would have told her that 1 minute before she would have been murdered. But this is the power of words. Eva wrote a journal, and that journal had such a power that 75 years later, this happened. After we did Eva, my daughter and myself, we decided that we should not stop there. And we created now an organization which we called Stelo Stories. Stelo in Esperanto means the North Star. And what we are planning to do, we're planning to make movies such as Eva on children from all around the world who wrote their memories in very difficult moments of history. And what we want to do is we want to take those journals that were written with a pen and a paper and move them to the platforms that young people communicate today, so that young people can actually learn about people who were in their age in different moments in history. We're actually taking those unique young people and we are empowering them by giving them the technology of today, the platforms of today, so they can talk to the generation who lives today in the way the generation of today is actually communicating. So those who want to keep reading them on books can read them on books, but those who want to meet them on Instagram or on TikTok, or those who want to meet them on future platforms, which are going to be AR, will be able to meet and to hear the stories of those children. And why is it important for us to tell the story of those kids and their point of view? Because we believe that the biggest danger for our humanity is to forget history. And if we will forget history, think what kind of a world we're going to live in. If we're not going to remember what happened in the past, and if this is going to be erased from our heads, imagine who will enjoy it most. Who will it empower most? The good guys, the bad guys, or the bad guys? Those who believe in democracies, or those who will fight against democracies? So our mission is actually to be able to remind us history, not to allow us to forget it, to fight against fake history, the same way that there is today fake news, by telling stories that were written by young people who had no agenda and who had no alternatives and had to face history the way it was, and just to translate it in a way that modern people in our time, young people, will be able to learn from it and communicate with it. History can protect us because it gives us a major lesson, and it tells us the great things about humanity, but also the worst parts of humanity. It can be a major and a very important guideline or a North Star of what we should be careful about, what should we follow, what should we protect. And that is actually one of the missions that we have. So in a way, Eva, that we decided to do a story because we found out as Jews that many people around the world, including Israel, forgot the Holocaust. Her story was so important to us, so we were telling her story to young people, but her impact on us was bigger than her story. Now we want to tell the stories of many children in many moments in history. We're planning to release our next movie in a couple of months. We finished doing it almost 6 months ago, and we're planning to release it. It's not going to be about a Jewish girl. It's not going to be anything that relates to my personal history. It's going to relate to an history of humanity and of all of us. And like this, we're going to release at least another 8 stories that we plan for the next couple of years, several years. We think that we live in a very difficult moment in history where truth is not clear anymore, that we're confused about what is true and what is not true, when we're confused about facts. And in such moment, history and life becomes much more fragile and much more dangerous. And we are trying to address this thing with this project. Again, our mission is to take those stories and bring them in a way that our young generation can talk and communicate. So we hold the phone. All the story with Eva was done from this phone. Even though there were 400 people on the set, the picture was done by the phone itself. We gave Eva, the little girl, to actually hold it as if she was there. And we told her to direct the phone to the things that she thinks that are important for her during the movie. So basically, we say as if Eva actually had the phone in her hand, and as if she had an Instagram where she could post her messages to the world those days. By doing this, we have to create a very authentic voice. We need to communicate in a very truthful way. The young person who gets the message from Eva has to think that Eva was talking to him directly. He has to believe that he really is communicating to Eva. He should not feel the presence of a director or even the writer or of a writer between him and Eva. It's a new type and it's a new genre of creating a movie. It has to be vertical, and it has to be done in a way that a young person will hold the phone. It cannot be a perfect picture. It cannot be totally accurate. It has to be very natural. So when I watch it, I really feel that I see the real story. And that was our mission. And with that mission and with those guidelines, we're going to keep telling stories that are going to be able to teach us and remind us, every child around the world, what our history was. It can show us the greatness, great moments of human being, but also the worst moment of human being. And it's going to help us to know what we want to have in our lives. And it's also going to teach us what we should protect ourselves. That's our goal and that's our mission. And here is again a girl that began writing her journal before the Nazis took over Hungary. And in 4 months later, she was already sent on a train and she was murdered. And her journal was translated to a movie within 24 hours, more than 300 million views. And more than that, it affected us to do this entire project for humanity. This is the power of documentation. This is the power of telling a story. And this is the power of protecting history. Thank you.
What an amazing project. Now, our first panel discussion about the remembrance of the Holocaust, Free Generation, Free Perspectives. The moderator is Elia Havemann, author of the book Wie werde ich Jude? How to Become a Jew, cybersecurity expert, and the husband of this lady next to me. But before Elia starts his panel discussion, he speaks with a Holocaust survivor, Naftali first, who he visited some days ago in his house in Haifa.
Good evening and welcome to our panel with the name 3 Generations, 3 Perspectives. Tonight we're going to speak with 3 people from all generations after the Holocaust, a survivor, a child of a survivor, and a grandchild. We want to understand their perspective on remembering the Holocaust and what it means to them. We're also going to speak to 2 experts in the field, and I'm going to host you tonight. My name is Elia Havemann. I'm a book author. I published a book about Judaism in Germany some years ago. And today I work in the Israeli high-tech industry as a product manager. The first member of this panel is Naftali Fürst, and I'm very happy that he found the time to speak to us. Naftali, du bist in Bratislava in der Slowakei geboren. Warum sprichst du so gut Deutsch?
Ich bin geboren in Bratislava in der Seite von, was Nähe zum Österreich ist. Das heißt Petržalka. Das ist eine Vorstadt von Bratislava. Und meine Muttersprache war Deutsch. Bis ich war 6 Jahre, habe ich nur Deutsch gesprochen zu Hause.
Diese Sprache der Täter war sehr lange tabu für dich. Was hat dich dazu bewogen, wieder Deutsch zu sprechen?
Ich habe geschwört, dass ich werde nie Deutsch sprechen nach der Shoah und ich werde nie nach Deutschland kommen. Oder nach Österreich. Und im Jahr 2005 hat man mich eingeladen, das erste Mal besuchen, das Konzentrationslager Buchenwald, wo ich war befreit. Am 11. April 1945. Und jetzt war das im Jahr 2005. Und das war meine erste Reise nach Deutschland, nach dem Krieg. Und wann ich war schon im Buchenwald, dort habe ich das erste Mal angefangen, wieder Deutsch sprechen.
War das ein befreiendes Gefühl oder ein beklemmendes Gefühl, endlich wieder die Muttersprache zu sprechen?
Überhaupt zurückkommen nach Deutschland, das war für mich eine sehr schwere Zeit und ein schweres Erlebnis. Ich habe gesehen, das erste Mal nach dem Krieg, die deutschen Polizisten und Zollamt. Das war für mich ein nicht gewöhnlicher Empfang. Ich habe das nicht so gut gefühlt mit dem. Mit der Sprache habe ich keine schwere Probleme, nur das, dass ich könnte nicht so gut sprechen, weil ich habe schon vergessen, wenn man 60 Jahre eine Sprache nicht spricht, dann vergisst man.
Du hast nie Wiedergutmachungen in Form von Geld von Deutschland angenommen. Und die Begründung ist, dass kein Geld der Welt aufwiegen kann, was dir angetan worden ist, was deiner Familie angetan worden ist. Wie beurteilst du heute generell die Bemühungen der Deutschen in der Wiedergutmachung und in der Aufarbeitung?
Was ist mir sehr leid, dass auch heute sind in Israel Leute, Überlebende, dass sie leben sehr schwer und sie haben Probleme, die minimale Probleme zum normales Leben. Und das tut mir sehr leid und ich hoffe, dass jemand wird das hören und wird diesen Leuten helfen, weil es gehört ihnen nicht, dass sie sollen auch die letzten Jahre so schwer leben. Und wir sind schon sehr wenige Leute. Die meisten sind schon nicht da. Und jetzt wir haben nur, ich glaube, nur 5 Jahre, 6 Jahre jemand. Und dann ist schon alles Schluss und die Überlebenden sind schon nicht auf dieser Welt.
Viele junge Deutsche wollen heute mit dem Thema Holocaust eigentlich nichts mehr zu tun haben. Die sagen, das waren nicht wir, das ist lange her, lasst uns mal einen Schlussstrich ziehen. Was sagst du denen?
Schauen Sie, ich kann Ihnen sagen, dass ich schon 15 Jahre erzählt meine Geschichte, da in Israel, in Yad Vashem, in Schulen. Und ich bin vielmal eingeladen, nach Deutschland und nach Österreich zu kommen. Und ich war in viele Schulen und ich erzähle und mit dem, dass ich erzähle meine Geschichte, mache ich, was ich soll machen, dass man das Shoah nicht vergisst. Und ich fühle, wenn ich komme zu den Schulen, sie sind froh, dass ich dort bin und ich fühle einen guten Kontakt mit den Leuten und mit den Schülern. Und ich habe so ein Gefühl, dass es ja interessiert. Aber ich habe auch getroffen, dass ich war in einer Schule und sie haben keine Ahnung gehabt von Shoah oder so etwas. Aber im Großen, ich bekomme dort eine große Ehre. Ich war voriges Jahr in Weimar, dort ist ein Festival Ahava und dort war ich in 5 Schulen und man zeigt dort meinen Film, meinen Lebensfilm von meiner Befreiung in Buchenwald und ich bekomme dort sehr große Ehre.
Was würdest du konkret sagen, wenn jemand sagt, Schlussstrich, ich habe damit nichts zu tun? Das waren vielleicht meine Großeltern, aber mich interessiert das nicht mehr, ich möchte nicht mehr mit der Schuld konfrontiert werden.
Ich sage auch immer, die Frage ist in den Schulen, ob sie noch schuldig sind. Und ich sage, die Kinder, was ich treffe jetzt, die jungen Leute, sind nicht schuldig. Aber ich kann ihnen nicht verzeihen. Ich habe kein Recht verzeihen in meine jüdischen Kameraden sind dort gestorben. Meine Familie ist viele Leute dort ermordet. Und ich habe kein Recht für die Menschen, was nicht leben, verzeihen. Ich sage immer, verzeihen kann ich nicht, aber sie können nur glauben, dass sie sind nicht verantwortlich. Verantwortlich waren ihre Eltern oder Großeltern. Sie sind nicht schuldig, aber vergessen so eine Tragödie, so eine große Massenschlacht in Europa kann man nicht und darf man nicht vergessen.
Du hast deine Geschichte aufgeschrieben in einem Buch. Ich habe da ein bisschen durchgeblättert. Das ist für mich nicht so leicht, muss ich sehr ehrlich zugeben, auch die Fotos zu sehen. Fändest du es wichtig, wenn in Deutschland Jugendliche deine Geschichte lesen und wenn ja, warum?
Ich glaube überhaupt, dass die Geschichte von Shoah ist sehr wichtig erzählen und lesen, weil wenn es keine Bücher sind oder keine Filme sind, wird man das schnell vergessen, weil solche Leute wie ich, Überlebende, sind schon sehr selten in der Welt und viele Leute können schon nicht erzählen, weil ich bin schon jetzt 88 Jahre alt und ich kenne viele meiner Kameraden, das sind schon gestorben und viele können nicht erzählen, weil sie schon haben keine Kraft zu dem. Darum glaube ich, dass die Dokumentation ist sehr wichtig zu dem Problem Erinnern die Shoah. Viele Fragen kommen von den Schülern und überhaupt von dem Publikum. Die Frage, ob ich glaube in Gott. Weil in dem Film habe ich gesagt, wenn ich war in Auschwitz und ich war sehr verzweifelt und ich war schon ganz allein und ich habe mir gemacht eine Prüfung und ich habe gesagt, jetzt werde ich den Gott schimpfen. Und ich habe gewartet und ich habe gewartet und nichts hat passiert. Und ich sage auch in dem Film, dass dort in Auschwitz habe ich verloren meine meine Emunah, in Gott.
Mein Vater, als er gehört hat, dass ich religiös werde, fand er das im ersten Moment gar nicht so schlecht, weil er dachte, ja, Judentum, da mehr darüber zu wissen, ist ja gar nicht so schlecht, weil er selber eben nicht so viel weiß über die jüdische Religion. Aber dann hat er mit mir geschimpft. Er hat gesagt, wie kannst du nach der Shoah an Gott glauben? Und ich habe keine gute Antwort. Ich habe wirklich keine gute Antwort und ich werde auch, deswegen habe ich dich nicht danach gefragt. Ich werde niemanden irgendwie versuchen, in die Bedrängnis zu bringen, sich dazu zu positionieren. Ich kann nicht beurteilen, was ihr durchlebt habt. Ich kann es nicht mal nachfühlen. Und ich weiß, dass manche Leute das näher zu Gott bringt, weil sie einen Halt brauchen. Und andere Leute sagen, wie kann es einen Gott geben, der sowas zulässt? Und da halte ich mich Gott sei Dank raus, so gut ich kann. Naftali, ich danke dir vielmals. Danke, dass du mich in deinem Haus willkommen geheißen hast. Und ich hoffe, dass du noch viele Menschen mit deiner Geschichte berühren kannst und hilfst dabei, die Erinnerung lebendig zu halten.
Okay, vielen Dank.
Yeah, good evening. That was a very, very touching moment for me as well to meet Naftali. And now for the second generation, I want to introduce to you Michael Schubitz. And Michael, as you can see from the background of his image, is working as a camera operator for the German television. And he lives in Tel Aviv. He's from Lithuanian origin. He is a child of Holocaust survivors. He is also a Yom Kippur War veteran from the IDF. And in 2001, he witnessed the Hamas terror attack on the Tel Aviv Dolphinarium. And that really changed his life, and in a way that he wouldn't expect. So, Michael, you only started researching your family history when your parents went through after a long time after they passed away. Can you explain why?
Well, as you mentioned, as an outcome of the Dolphinarium explosion, me as a cameraman and my assistant, we were very early there. It was by a mere chance of many factors. It was a Friday night, the roads were opened. I am a Tel Avivian, so I knew how to get there. I got there very quickly, and suddenly these people were dying in front of me, lying there. And it was really a view that could not be overcome easily. A month later, I heard my wife talking to a friend of mine who lives in England, and she said to me, maybe it will not be a good idea to send Mickey to you because Mickey is not okay. And that made me the first time realize that really something is wrong with me. And I went to ask for help, and my help was a psychologist. And pretty quickly, we came upon a very dark chapter, a very dark picture in me, and that's the Holocaust history of my parents. And and she asked me, what do you know about your parents? And I said, actually nothing, because my parents never told me anything. And I said, and she said to me, well, you better go and research and find out, because you are sitting in a big barrel of monsters, and they must come out. What do you know? So I said to her, listen, I know, for instance, that my mother saw how her father is being killed. She was a child and she was watching it from the window. She said to me, I'll give you an idea. If you go to this window where your mother, if you manage once to go to this window where your mother watched your grandfather being killed, this may cure something in you, because there is something in you is unsolved. And this is actually what made me start this way, to solve the problem that I managed to understand that I carry in me.
So the psychologist suggested that you would go and really work up what happened to you, what happened to your family, and the knowledge that you found out with all of your research that you did it help? Was it a relief, or was it a burden on you that you now understood what was really going on?
Well, one has to understand, I'm sure it's a human factor that is common to many people, also from different backgrounds. There was a door in me that was closed, and once I opened it, it changed my life. Suddenly I saw and I started looking at things all the time in the perspective of the Shoah. Personally, but also generally. I mean, you know, if you hear, let's say 5 years ago, there was a crisis in Europe, and suddenly it was just a little crisis. Many refugees looked for refuge, like my parents. You know, although I believe that you cannot relate the Shoah to anything else. Nevertheless, the Syrian people who fled to Europe and were asking for help, I could identify with them very much. Although the Syrians are behind the border, actually our enemies, suddenly I felt a lot of compassion for them. And look here, in the little crisis in Europe opened so many Pandora boxes with devils, and suddenly there was the AFD in Germany, and I judge everything that is happening around me politically and personally today on the background of the Holocaust. The fact that the AFD and the Pegida started to demonstrate made me very sensible to this suffering of other people, which is something that I always had. Once you grow in a house of people who were going through what my parents went through, you are grown with a heart for the suffering of the other one. And this became stronger, I could say, in me.
It's what you just told me is it's a little bit dangerous, because some Germans think that because we as a Jewish people went through the Holocaust, that the Holocaust was some kind of institution that made us better people. So how can you, I don't know, do that, what you do to the Palestinians after you went through the Holocaust? And I always strictly object that, because, you know, the Holocaust was nothing to, it's, you know, it wasn't a school where you could go through in order to learn for life. But on the other hand, I can see from your answer that it did something to you, and it allows you to have more compassion about what's going on in the countries around us.
Yes, but listen, of course, I live in a place that is very problematic, and it's far from being perfect, but there is no comparison to anything what I learned about what my parents went through and my people went through, what I knew before, and so you cannot relate the Holocaust to anything in the history at all. I'm sorry, but, you know, it's not because it's mine and it's unique, but because it was an industrialized killing, and it allowed, let's say, my parents, you know, came from Lithuania, and in Lithuania, 98% of the Lithuanian Jews were killed, were murdered, the women were raped before, the property was stolen and taken, and this is not something that you can compare with anything else in history. There were 235,000 Lithuanian Jews, and the 8,000 were left, also my parents. That made me, of course, wonder a lot about why, and this is something that you hear also from many survivors, why me? Why, what, you know, what happened in the world and in the history of my parents, and still they survived, and I could come to this world, and suddenly it made me appreciate a lot my own life. You know, what I see it as a big present. Suddenly, I can cherish a lot more.
what you just said is your parents felt like, why me? Why did I survive and not my surrounding? Is that one of the reasons why your parents never spoke about the Holocaust and just, never put that burden upon you? Or what do you think? What was the reason not to speak about it?
My parents died pretty young. I learned that the older you get, the more you get the understanding that you have to inherit your story to the next generation. My parents died, my father died at the beginning of the 70s, last century. My mother died 15 years later. Both did not reach their 60th birthday. And I think it's a very combined. First of all, they wanted, we grew up in a new state. Suddenly, they came to Israel and suddenly the cards were mixed again. And they were, first of all, very happy to start life anew. They were still young. They got suddenly a family, children, and they could be happy about surviving. And that was their interpretation. I had in my class, let's say, children where the parents were so traumatized that they they couldn't grow their children properly. I remember, people, children coming to the class and saying, I couldn't sleep tonight because my mother was screaming about the Holocaust the whole night and things like that. Well, that was not my case. I grew up in a happy family. But now I ask myself, of course, my parents were also playing something for us. They were not allowing themselves to so partly also, I'm sorry to say, but the Israel in its first years was praising a lot the new Sabra image, and the Holocaust survivors were those who surrendered easily, those who they were ashamed. They were ashamed that they went through what they went. And so they didn't talk about it. But mainly, I'm sure my parents were convinced that it's not healthy for us to know what they went through. I remember, let's say, my mother playing with her friends' cards and they were chatting and so, and suddenly I go into the room and whoop, silence, because they were talking about the Holocaust between themselves. And these were things we were not allowed to hear. I'm convinced today that those who were told everything and those who were told nothing share the same problem.
Okay. Michael, thank you very, very much.
Thank
you for sharing your story and being so open also about your traumatizing event in your life. It was a real pleasure to talk to you. And now I want to move to our next panelist, Karen Knoll. She's representing the third generation, and she was born in Israel. She lived many years in France. Her mother, Mireille Knoll, survived the Holocaust by escape, and her grandfather, Kurt, survived Auschwitz-Birkenau. And in 2018, something really, really bad happened. Her grandmother was brutally murdered by a Muslim neighbor and friend while living in France. So, Karen, how much did your grandparents tell you about what happened? We just heard from Michael that he didn't really hear much, but I have the feeling that the third generation actually was in a position to hear more. Is that true?
I was young when my grandfather was alive, so I couldn't ask the questions. My grandmother knew from what he told her, and it wasn't a lot because it was 4 years in Birkenau from 14 to 18. So after they got married, he wanted to prove something, I believe, and went back to Germany and spoke German. So it was something in him that he wanted to achieve. So actually, 2 years ago, I asked my father got sick. And I told him, we don't really know nothing about your side of the family. And you should you should ask, you should see what's going on there before it's too late. And I was talking about him because he was very sick. And he took the mission. He went back and asked my grandmother and asked his uncles and got back really with a story about what happened. So that's how we know what we know. And then my grandmother got murdered, so we didn't expect that. But we do know that she escaped with her father. He was working with clothes. He was bringing clothes to France, so he had a Brazilian passport. So they escaped with this passport to Brazil, and then they moved to Canada. And after a few years, they came back to France.
Okay. I'm also like from the third generation, and I grew up without a grandfather and without knowing where he would be buried because there was no grave. And it did change me as a person. What happened to you? Did the whole story shape you as a person, or were you able to, build your life independently of that?
I think there's two parts of me, maybe three. I will try to explain. I think the Holocaust, as a young person, was for me like a movie. Like if I was there, I would have been a partisan. I will fight the Nazis. Like in the Inglourious Bastard, I will be like that.
Yeah, I love the movie for that only because it gave us a feeling.
It's a great movie.
How could it have been?
And the second part of me is after I had children, and that's something totally different. Like every Holocaust Day, it's like I'm going through my personal Holocaust. It's my personal grieving, and it was nothing to do with my grandmother. So the third part, I will say, it's now that I'm taking a part in telling her story, in being her representative and her voice. So that's why I'm here tonight.
Which we are very thankful about. Your grandmother was brutally murdered. And so I think you're the right person to ask this question. Do you think the Holocaust can happen again anywhere in the world?
I think there's some Holocausts that are already happening in Africa, for example. But let's just put the right terms. Holocaust is dehumanization of a religion. It's taking someone who is a group of people that have a religion and saying, those are not human beings. This is what the Holocaust did. It wasn't a war. We had a lot of war. We won the most of our wars, but the Holocaust was really taking the Jewish and saying there are not real people. They're not deserve living. And I must tell you, in the 90s, we were living in France, and I had a nanny, a Polish nanny. So in the 90s, it was 45 years after the war, right? And my mother told her, listen, we don't need your service anymore because we're leaving to Israel. And she said, why? What? Why? Why are you leaving to Israel? The Jewish people over there. Now she lived with us. And we're not like religious and everything, but she lived in our house. And my mother told her, we are Jewish. And she said, no, you're not. Jewish have tails and big nose. You're not Jewish. And she said, yes, we are. And she was like 20 something. And it was 45 years after the war. So she couldn't know. She wasn't there. So she was like the second or third generation. And that's what they keep saying 45 years after the Holocaust. So can it happen again? When we talk, you told me if it will happen again, they need people to let it be. And I don't believe that people will let it be. There was 30,000 people who walked the Marche Blanche after my grandmother was murdered from all the races. There was Muslim, there was Christian, everybody was there for showing their solitude and to say, no, it would not happen in my watch. So
that's beautiful. So we are the third generation. What do you think is our task in this world to keep the memory of the Holocaust alive? You just mentioned already that you think that one of your duties is to tell your grandmother's story. What can we do in order to keep the memory alive for the next generations?
You know, every Pesach, we're telling the story of the exodus of Egypt, and we're telling the children that there was Paro and it was very bad for us, and we fight it, and then God saved us, and we escaped 40 years, etc., etc. So every year we're doing that because that's what happened. But we can go to Egypt and see in our own eyes what happens and where. In Israel, at the age of high school, there's a Masa to Poland. It's like a journey to Poland, and we're taking our young students and soldiers to see with their own eyes what happened, and they're going to the camps and they're learning the history, and there's a lot of preparation before that because mentally it's very, very difficult. And I think that this journey to Poland should apply with all high schools and not only the Jewish and not only in Israel, so people will see, because I'm sure that in Poland this nanny that we had, she didn't go there. She didn't know. And maybe she went back to her mother and said, how you didn't tell me what happened? Why you didn't tell me? I didn't know.
In Poland, yeah.
Yes. There are houses like 100 meters from the camp. People are living there. It's
Yeah, I until today I refused to go to Auschwitz. My grandfather was murdered there, and I don't want to see it. Maybe I will change my mind. I don't know what's going to happen when my kids, will be in the age where they will be sent to these camps. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you'll stay in touch. It was very great talking to you. The next member of our panel is Barbara Glück. Barbara, she's from Austria. She's a historian. She used to work as a teacher. She received a doctorate from the University of Vienna in 2002. And now she's doing exactly what we just talked about. She's running a memorial. She's the director of the Mauthausen Memorial in Austria. Can you give us some explanations and some words about what are you doing in Mauthausen?
Hello. First of all, I would like to say that it's quite hard for me to talk after the first, the second, and the third generation, and I'm really touched by the words I just heard. For me, working at the Mauthausen Memorial, I used to say that Mauthausen is a very special place. It is a place where people were murdered. So this is a cemetery. It is a place of commemoration. And today, I like to say it's a young place. Young people, they come to the memorial. And it's a place where people can discuss, where people can talk about what happened. And people sing and commemorate, and that not now in these times, but normally. And it's a place of pictures, and a place of memories, and a place of life stories. And for more than that, Mauthausen is not only a place. Mauthausen is a topic, is an issue of today, and it's a kind of commitment. So we talk about more than only Mauthausen as a place, then Mauthausen as a commitment of us working at the memorial and everybody who comes visiting the memorial. And that is, I think, that is very special for a memorial like Mauthausen.
A memorial in Austria, you have to say, right?
In Austria, yes.
Yeah.
And Mauthausen is the biggest memorial in Austria, with some other memorials. And I'm really sorry. It was the whole time really easy for me, but now exactly in that moment, my son enters to the room. Yeah.
That's what happens in Corona times when we do
I'm sorry,
when we do live from home.
For the whole time, it was quite silent, but now, okay, he's.
That's perfectly fine. So you already said that young people come to the memorial. Is that your target audience, or?
We're still blessed when you have survivors at our memorial, and we can guide them and we can talk to them and discuss them. But they are rare moments. It's quite often that we can welcome families of people murdered at the Mauthausen concentration camp, or former prisoners. We have national and international guests. Of course, it's important for us to say it's an important group when young people come to the memorial, but we would like to talk to everybody, and not only to visitors coming to the memorial. We would like to reach also people they had no idea. The Mauthausen Memorial, it exists or not. We would like to reach people all over the world, and as we recognize that even in that last month with Corona, that it's possible with the digital world that gives us the possibility to, when we want and when we find the right words, we can talk to everybody, and that should be our ambition.
Do you think that people that went to the memorial and saw with their own eyes what happened, are they more immune to conspiracy theories, not only about the Holocaust, whether it happened or not, but also about other kind of conspiracies that are going around? You think it's an important way to teach about conspiracies as well, because that's a hot topic today?
Our main question at the memorial is, and we ask that everybody who comes to our memorial, is what does this have to do with me? And it's not us that we give you the answer, it's you, and it's everybody. And we encourage them to think about it. And what I would like to say is, there is no guarantee. There is no guarantee that you're aware of racism, of anti-Semitism, of any kind of hate. But I'm convinced that we can push everybody to open their eyes, to open their mind, and to think about it. And what we can see at the memorial, and there's our experience, that when we discuss the topics of the past and the present, and to build the bridges that people think and people discuss, the main question is, do they keep anything in their mind when they go back? We tried. Yeah.
If they go out.
Sorry.
Yeah. So no. What I would love to believe is that those people that came to your memorial and then go back to their daily life, that they some kind of become a vaccine, for the population, so that when they hear a conspiracy theory, that they will object and say, no, I've seen it, it's different.
That is what we were working for, what we are working for, and I can only say, I hope. I'm a positive person. I'm convinced that we can reach something. It's hard to say, and I don't want to give a guarantee, and I cannot give a guarantee for being a better person when they go out of my memorial. But we would like to ask. We ask questions, and when you come to our memorial, you have many questions, and you have a kind of idea what it looks like and what happened there and whatever. But what we would like to reach is when you go home, when you go back home with more questions then you came to our memorial.
Yeah.
Because you start
coming to questions. Coming to
Sorry?
questions. I have to cut you off a little bit because I still want to speak to Elishav, and we're running out of time a little bit. We have a question that we got from one of the people that signed up for the event, and I'm very happy about that. We encourage people to send questions. And Anna from Berlin sent a very interesting question. She says, how can we persuade the government to invest in education to prevent the Holocaust from happening again? Because you also rely on government money, right?
Yes, it's very important for me to say that it concerns us all. It concerns everybody, and it's not only a topic for me as a director or for all memorials or for teachers or students. It should concern everybody. Yeah? And I would like to underline that because it's an investment in people, and of course, it's my job and it's the job of our memorials that we have to convince. We have to convince politicians. We have to convince people. We have to convince adults to bring their children, teachers to bring the students. I think that's very important. Yeah, not only to work with people coming to the memorial. We have to convince that we get the support, that we have the teacher that we can work with, and we have the politicians that they support us also financially.
Thank you very much, Barbara. It was great talking to you, and good luck with your work. And I hope that you will reach many people with your memorial. Elishav Rabinovich was with us today. He is the community manager of the Zikaron Besalon project. The Zikaron Besalon means memory in your living room. So he doesn't have to convince people to come to him. He is actually going to the people. He has an MA in Talmud Studies and in Bar-Ilan University, and he's running the Zikaron Besalon. And can you tell us what you're doing exactly, Elishav?
Basically, Zikaron Besalon is an initiative that started 10 years ago, with the idea that the only way to connect to something is to bring it to the houses of people, to be part of their lives. I believe personally, and the initiative believe that museums are not enough, and we actually the most powerful way to maintain a memory is to have it in rooted and embedded in the calendar, as in a annual event that happens with the public everywhere in the world. And we have the concept of other holidays that commemorates things that Passover, like we all know that we have 3,000 years of traditions, of local tradition, that everyone does it in his own way. And we believe that the Holocaust is big enough and to create another, not holiday, but like a ritual, a day of memory in the calendar for years.
So you're working with survivors that come into the living room today, right?
Yeah, actually.
Which countries are you active in?
So we started in Israel, and really fast it grew to all over the world. We know about like 60 different countries, but it's a real decentralized. Everyone can do it. It's just like a format that you can actually do in your house. So we don't keep track of all the events. They don't have to register. We ask them to, so we can know. But a lot of people are doing it without even knowing that there is an organization, which is good.
So you feel like you're inspiring people to adopt this this method of bringing memory to the people. We heard from Naftali, and it's sadly it's true. In like 5 years, there will be no more survivors left. What's your plan to do this in the future? How should we continue?
So it started when we realized that we won't have the survivors forever, and we cannot rely on them. So we need to make it a real, something that actually touches the people. So people sitting around, and at the beginning it was what brought people. But after the Zikaron Salon is not just a lecture from a Holocaust survivor, it's a whole dynamic, a discussion that comes after the discussion, after the lecture, the speech, and a meeting and gathering. And we found and realized that the gathering might be even more powerful than the talk. And some people really want to come together and talk about different issues and bring and give new ways to look at the events and their personal stories. And so we're doing the second generation. This year we had a major phenomena when on the lockdown we did it on Zoom. And it was really it was April, so it wasn't we didn't know if people will actually show up to Zoom. And not just that we have more events than ever, and we found out later that a lot of the second generation is rose to the occasion and realized that it's their own. It's on their own. I'll tell you, my mother spoke for the first time in her life. Why? She just felt that it's time. Now when we have the lockdown and the survivors that are with us couldn't participate, the second generation just felt that it's true, it's time. And we have hundreds of them in Israel that spoke for the first time. So,
you can invite Michael. I guess he would be happy to volunteer. As a last question that you can answer for all of us, because we saw all of these ways to keep the memory alive, and still anti-Semitism seems to be on the rise, while anti-Zionism is on the rise. Does it actually help? Or are we just, without all of this, it would be worse? What do you think?
I'm not doing it as opposing anti-Semitism. I'm doing it as a way to cure and help my people. I think we never really dealt with meaning of our loss, personal loss, our grandparents, and it's more like a healing session for a whole country. The anti-Semitism is will come later. I do believe that dealing with it will. Part of it is thinking of why and how it happened, but it's not the focus, and it's barely comes up in the meetings. It's more like people bringing personal things, they talking from the heart to heart. It's not a discussion about geopolitics and most.
Elishav, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Good luck with your project. It's a wonderful idea. When it comes to the third generation, call me.
It's already there.
Okay. Thank you, everybody who was watching this, joining us for this panel, 3 generations, 3 perspectives. I hope you learned something. I hope you understand the perspectives of those 3 generations and why it is so important to keep the memory alive. Not the memory of the Holocaust as a whole, but also the memory of all people that are suffering from it until today, because I think it touched all of our lives, first generation, second generation, third generation. And people seem to misunderstand that even for us in the third generation, like Karen and I, still have to deal with it every day. So thank you very much for watching, and enjoy this wonderful summit. And I hope you enjoyed the panel. Thank you very much.
Whoa, what an interesting, intelligent and touching discussion. Thanks very much, Elia, and thanks very much to all the panelists. I could have listened to you much longer, but there is still a tough schedule we have to go through. For me, Jenny, when I listened to the Holocaust survivor, Naftali First, speaking in German language, but he said at the beginning he never wanted to speak German again. Me as a German, I nearly cried. I think it's so emotional, and it shows also what's positive in what could be positive in history. But before we go to the next panel, I would like to ask you, Jenny, you're also the generation of survivors. What did you feel when you watched this panel?
Well, yes, you're right. I'm the fourth generation, the next generation, and you know, I still feel the Holocaust trauma because I grew up with the stories from my great-grandmother telling the story of her and her family during the Holocaust. And I experienced that. But my kids, for example, are already the fifth generation.
You have 3 kids.
Yes, and they will be, they will probably not experience the Holocaust survivors like Naftali, because when you know, when they will be old enough to understand what Holocaust is, probably we won't have any survivors anymore. And also, it really hurts me that we see nowadays people on the street of Berlin that are relativizing the Holocaust. They're in protest against Corona restrictions. They're wearing the yellow star, you know, victimizing themselves, and they're spreading conspiracy theories, and it's very worrying for me. And also, of course, the growth of the of anti-Semitism and extremism in Europe in general.
Your husband Elia, who was the moderator of the last panel, he said he never went to go to Auschwitz. Do you have some discussions with him about this? Would you go?
I even like, also for me, I think it would be too hard to go.
And when your children want to go, because they should go, because every school, yeah.
I agree. I think that for some people that still are somehow connected emotionally with the generation that survived Holocaust, it's still too painful. I hope they will be able to go.
Okay. And we also remember what happened last year on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is close at the end of September. Last year we had the terror attack on the synagogue in Halle. The next day, I'm not a depressive person, but the next day I had really problems to go out of the bed. Everything felt so dark for me and so, you know, so senseless. I had to force myself to stand up. And I couldn't think that this can happen again in Germany, but it happened.
It's shocking.
It's shocking. And that's why it's very important that we stay in the discussion here, because it's not an alternative to stay in bed, it's the opposite. We have to fight against it. Searching alliances against anti-Semitism and hate speech. This is the topic of our next panel. We also want to focus a little bit now on the new media, on the social media, so-called social media. And I'm very happy that this panel is moderated by Markus Spielmann, Swiss journalist, entrepreneur and media advisor, and the former head of journalism and the former editor-in-chief of the Neue Zürcher Zeitung. Please, Markus, the panel is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Susanne. Warm welcome to everybody joining us this very evening in this live debate about anti-Semitism and hate speech in the digital era. Tonight, we want to discuss a phenomenon that had always accompanied us in analog life, but is now becoming more and more part of the digital media cosmos, the devaluation, the denigration, the open racism, not only, but also of Judaism, as well as the almost endemic disinhibition of language, style, and form, especially on social media. Let me formulate the following thesis. The problem is not new, however, it is getting bigger because it's easier than ever to promote, distribute, and share anti-Semitism, racism, and hate in anonymity and globally. And therefore, the numbers of violators and those of potential victims are getting bigger and bigger. So what should and what can be done in an enlightened, civilized environment to prevent both hate speech and anti-Semitism, or to ensure that the phenomena mentioned, dissemination, anonymity, and perpetration, can at least be limited? What role do we play as media consumers and as media producers? And by producers, I mean not just journalists and media entrepreneurs, but all of us, because anyone who uses social media today is at the same time a liker and a sharer. And thus we all may influence our communities both directly and indirectly. And how and where do we draw the line between freedom of opinion and censorship, between political correctness and permissible criticism? How do we deal with different opinions, but also with the fact that we live in an age in which historical memory is fading and the distinction between true and false, between opinion and facts is becoming increasingly faded, even intentionally blurred? These are some of the questions I'd like to discuss with my guests this evening, whom I'm warmly welcome. Connected from Switzerland, Roger Schawinski, one of the most prominent journalists here in Switzerland, a media pioneer and successful media entrepreneur, but also an author and a multi-interested intellectual. Ksenia Svetlova, also formed as a journalist, was born in Russia and now works as a senior research fellow at the Institute for Policy and Strategy at IDC Herzliya and Mitvin Institute in Herzliya. Nicodemus Schnabel, monk of the Benedictine order at Dormition Abbey in Jerusalem. Father Nicodemus is also director of the Jerusalem Institute of the Goethe Society, one of the oldest Catholic scientific societies in Germany, which is dedicated to fostering and promoting the interdisciplinary exchange of science. Rabbi Dov Lipman, a former Knesset deputy of the party Yesh Atid, which mainly supports the secular Israeli middle class. The party has been part of one of the former coalition governments under PM Netanyahu, but this is Israel, switched sides and is now part of an independent opposition force. Rabbi Lipman was born in the US and has emigrated to Israel a couple of years ago. He is a columnist and well-known commentator. And last but not least, Alana Baroff, who, if I'm correctly informed, is attending from Durban in South Africa, where she works for the World Jewish Congress and runs the Adult Education and Social Justice portfolio at the Durban Holocaust Center. Unfortunately, Zavzan Jebli, representative of the state of Berlin to the federal government and state secretary for civic engagement and international representation, had to apologize at short notice. So enough of introduction, let's start with the analysis of the problem and maybe also how it has evolved. And because she has to leave this panel earlier, I'd like to address my first question to you, Ksenia. I mentioned the fact that more and more grown-ups known about the Holocaust just from the books nowadays. So how has that an impact on their attitude in respect of anti-Semitism, also in respect of hate speech if they use social media?
Well, thank you so very much. It's good to be here with you, with friends, with people with whom we share common values. And even despite the very difficult situation now with Corona in Israel and in some other countries, it's still good to have the opportunity to get together to discuss these very important issues for all of us. First of all, I apologize for having to leave earlier due to some unplanned circumstances. As for your question, well, I think that this is the course of life. Yes. So of course, unfortunately, those who experienced themselves the horrors of the Holocaust are leaving us. First of all, what we can do right now in order to maintain the memory is, first of all, to dedicate time to them and to gather their memories in a way that will be also available to the younger generation. Because I hear more and more from young Israelis who study Holocaust through their whole life in the school, from very little age. My twin daughters, who are now 11, the first time they heard of Holocaust was when they're 4. But their knowledge about what actually happened during the Holocaust was very, very limited until, I took them to my mother, to their grandmother. She has also very little memory because she was born in 1941. But still, her grandfather perished in the Holocaust, and most of the family. Telling this very human story about the absurdity of this evil force, I think it did the absolute change, for them, because they heard it from, well, not perhaps the first source, but still they heard a human story about human beings and not only reading it through the books. So I think that what we experienced, this social experiment, I would say, the story of Eva on the Instagram, and the attempt, maybe it was not the most refined one, but it was a genuine attempt to interest the younger generation in this the most important story of our people. And I would like to see more and more of these stories using the new formats, using the social media, because this is how young people and, also not so young people are talking this day. This is how all of us consume information. So I assume that there will be more of such projects soon.
May I interrupt you, Ksenia, on that at this very moment? And we will come back to this very topic, of course, during the debate. But to clarify, do you think that not having first-hand experience in a physical manner, because these people will fade away one day, of course, the survivors, the survivors of the Holocaust, do you see that to tape them and to deliver these memories, these personal memories in a digital area, in a different form, that this will have the same or a similar impact on the younger generation as a personal contact with a survivor?
I have to tell you that it might not be a very popular opinion, yes, but I think that it might have, in some cases, even more influence.
Okay.
Because, I follow, and I also followed this story when being a Knesset member. And I heard complaints from teachers when they say, well, we bring to them, a person who survived the Holocaust with these blue numbers on his hand. And it's very difficult to keep the concentration of the students more than 5 to 10 minutes, because this is the ability of probably to consume, the information. And they sit with him for an hour. It's difficult for this, old person, of course, all of them are very, very old. We have to respect that, of course. It's difficult for them to concentrate. And, if we want to really, seize the opportunity of the social media and to also turn it into educational tool, I believe that we have to do our utmost right now to be very, very innovative, because we cannot afford to lose this moment when we still have around us people who lived through this evil and can tell their story. The newer formats, that they are more perhaps adapted to the younger people's style of life. They are not bad. They are different. Okay? For us, because I heard the story about Holocaust when I was about 6. From my own grandmother who survived the Holocaust. Okay, but we all know, that today most of the students in Israel already do not meet a Holocaust survivor. Some of them go to, but this is much later. So they might encounter the story in different formats in their everyday life when it's handled to them through the channels that they are tuning into. So I do not know, because I'm not an expert in this field, how, what kind of effect will it have in comparison to us, those who actually knew the survivors. But I do know that we have to be prepared. It's not something that, it's fell on us as a surprise. Yes, older people, unfortunately, they die and they leave us. They might go when they leave. Memory that is documented, well documented, taped, and there are very strong words being echoed time and again through various media.
Okay, thank you very much, Ksenia. So we heard now a lot already about the, let's say, the positive effects of social media, or how social media or new digital medium could be used to promote and to keep alive the memory and to fight or to cope with anti-Semitism. But let's look at the other side of the coin. Alana, do you see specific forms of anti-Semitism or hate speech? We will also talk a little bit more about hate speech in general afterwards, but do you see specific forms on social media? And if so, what are really the difference to other forms of xenophobia or racism coming from an analog world?
Well, Marcus, thank you so much for having me on the panel this evening. It is a privilege to be here with you all and to be talking about such an important topic, one that's really close to my heart. And yes, I think that the beauty of social media is that it allows for so many different voices from around the world to be heard. But the other side of that is that it can be quite a dangerous weapon of disinformation, and it can be used to manipulate. Something that we have seen over recent years is a rise in both anti-Semitism and xenophobia, as well as other forms of hate speech on social media platforms. And what's been interesting, at least in South Africa, is the use of medieval blood libel type classic anti-Semitic tropes, which has surprised some people because it is such a new medium and technology. But a lot of the content that we deal with on a daily basis here is looking at Jews as controlling the world, blood libel, classic tropes. And the same with the xenophobic content that we see here in South Africa. It really taps into the structural inequalities and the racism that has become embedded in our society and hasn't been adequately dealt with since the fall of apartheid. So it's harkening back to the past, but we're also seeing a relevance with the content, tapping into the current challenges and insecurities that societies are facing, whether it be global warming, economic recessions, and now COVID-19 and the coronavirus. Just as there's been this pandemic around the world, we've seen a rise in hate speech, and the anti-Semitism and xenophobia has taken that insecurity and added a flavor to it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alana. You mentioned that the problem is growing, or I mean, we have some studies also already about the phenomena. Roger, you sitting here also in Switzerland and midst in Europe, and maybe you could also give us a little bit more about your experience and your feelings about the development in Europe, especially, of course, in Germany, in France, in Italy. Do you also see kind of worsening development concerning the topic we are talking about?
Definitely. I mean, conspiracy theories have been around for hundreds of years, but only since the start of the internet, conspiracy theories have grown tremendously, and these people are not open to arguments. I've written a book about that. Just on the contrary, if give them arguments why they're wrong, then they feel even stronger about their conspiracy theories. And of course, in the conspiracy theories, historically, the Elders of Zion, I mean, this started basically the conspiracy theories in 200 years ago. Anti-Semitism plays a very big role in that. And the problem is, can we have a conversation with these people? And I don't think so. People who are in this world, they are not reachable. I have talked to some of these people and asked them, can we talk about it? They say, yeah, look, once you've seen the light, once you have understood that behind every story, there's another story. Behind every truth that is presented in our media, there is another truth, then you can't get out of it. And that is very dangerous. We see now this phenomenon of QAnon in America, which is coming to Switzerland, which is coming to Germany. And of course, all of these conspiracy theories lead back to anti-Semitism. And that is a very dangerous thing. And I don't know really how we can deal with this phenomenon. And I'm really very pessimistic about how we can stop that.
Mm-hmm. Gives me the chance to introduce also Rabbi Lippman, because you grew up and have been socialized in the States, and I guess you still observe the current affairs very, very closely. Does the endemic use of Twitter by President Trump, has this changed, in your perspective, the political dialogue in the US? And that the fact that there is basically no more consensus about ethical standards because they are constantly violated by the president itself as a function.
Well, as an Israeli politician, and thank you again for having me, I'm going to remove myself from specific elements of American politics. But there's no doubt that in all of my work, especially now with an organization called Honest Reporting, where we're constantly monitoring what's happening, there's no doubt that there has to be real initiatives to crack down on the companies that own the social media venues to clearly see anti-Semitism as hate speech. We see so many examples where, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, where on the one hand, they'll crack down on certain forms of hate speech, but not on things that are anti-Semitic. And we're working very hard on that process to make sure that there are clear guidelines, exactly what is anti-Semitism, what is not to be tolerated. And we work very hard throughout the day to monitor to make sure that anti-Semitic things are taken down. Just as an example, in July, Louis Farrakhan gave this horrific anti-Semitic speech, and it was on YouTube, and there's no reason for it allowed to be on there. And we were part of a process to get that removed. We have to be constantly vigilant about that. I agree with Roger. You're not going to be able to change people who believe in this classic anti-Semitism to change, but we can be active to make sure that it's removed from the public platform, to make sure that it's not spread to those who are not part of that camp at the current time. And that's where we really have to focus our efforts. We at Honest Reporting work very hard on that, but that's where collectively, I believe, all groups in the world who are against hate, against any kind of racism, against any kind of discrimination can join that battle to make sure that anti-Semitism is included in that category.
Thank you. But Father Nicodemus, as a Catholic monk living in Jerusalem within a very mixed religious environment, and so to say, not the one of the most peaceful ones, I wonder, do you see kind of cultural or social differences between societies in respect how to deal with the phenomena? Rabbi Lippman just mentioned that there have been efforts to crack down this kind of anti-Semitism on this specific platforms. But of course, we have to find a kind of common ground. What is the problem really? And I guess different societies have a different view on that. What is your experience as let's say a person living in different cultures and different societies?
Yes, but I think, thank you that I'm here on that panel. I'm very proud of that. I'm very thankful. I think there's one common in all societies is the problem of make it short. If you see Twitter, 280 letters you have, characters you have. Also others, the algorithm of Instagram, of YouTube, it's pushing you, shorter is better. And I think the big problemacy I face, it's that our world, it's wonderful complex. And I think as a religious leader, we have to teach to give joy of that taste of complexity, that there are no easy answers. For example, my founder of my order, Benedict of Nursia, he described us as God seekers. So we are on the way. So we are every day on the way to get deeper in that mystery and that complexity. And I think that's exactly the opposite of what conspiracy theories offer. They say, okay, this complex world, it's too complex. There must be an easy answer. And the easy answer, it's clear, it's this or this group. The best answer, of course, best in a cynic way, are the Jews, because they're a group often people are not facing in daily life. So you can create a monster better if you have no contra experience in your daily life. For example, if I would say all medicines are guilty, then you say, but my doctor, he is totally reasonable and I can't. But if you say the Jews, I think a great majority of people, especially who are anti-Semitic and are follower of that conspiracy theory, have never met a Jew in real life. So they believe, okay, these are the monsters behind that all. Now it's clear why I'm in such situation, why the world is so. And that's the point. I think we have, and that's, I see the task for all religious leaders, to teach the beauty of complexity and to be very critical and be very attention cautious about easy answers. So if one offer you to explain you the whole world in 90 seconds, be careful.
I like the beauty of complexity, this notion. I mean, that sounds very, very seductive, but to challenge it a little bit from the perspective of the political realities. I mean, complexity is not the concept to win for politicians and not the concept to win majorities, even in mature, in ripe democracies like Switzerland, for example. I mean, the whole concept of the political discussion, debate is reduce complexity. So how to deal with this, let's say, contradictory sides? On one side, yes, we have to be differentiate, we have to explain the problem, we have to be very careful also in the use of our words. And on the other side, the beauty in brackets that a politician likes to provoke, to reduce this kind of complexity, because he or she knows with that concept, I'm on the winning side, I'm not on the losing side. So what's the answer on that? Roger, you have been very pessimistic about that, but I mean, what is it? Is that the end of democracy then?
It's really, if we are in difficult times, and we are in difficult times, these things happen more often, and if it comes from the top, and we have seen it in Hungary, we have seen it in Poland, we have seen it in the United States, where he said there are fine people on both sides, and he talks about neo-Nazis. So they use that whenever it's a problem, you can refer that maybe the Jews are behind that. And so I'm really pessimistic, and we've seen it after 2015, after what happened in Europe, what happened in Germany. There was more anti-Semitism in Germany. Of course, at the AfD, the party of the extreme right, had a renewal. They came up to 15% or more of the electorate. Now they went down a little bit to 10%. But in difficult times, And we are in difficult times. We are not out of that. We don't know how long this is going to last, whether the world will somehow sometimes be like the way we have experienced the world in the last 70 years. Maybe then the search for scapegoats, and then you go after the usual suspects, as we have known in history. So we have to really be careful. Yes, I am kind of pessimistic.
Let's come back to the day one of this conference is labeled as the Media Holocaust and Generation Z, time for new approaches. So it's a clearly addressed, let's say, responsibility with Generation Z, the fourth generation who lives now and has been socialized, totally socialized already by social media, by digital media, by smartphones. So, to concentrate a little bit on this generation, do we need another form of a new culture of memory, a new way how to promote to younger the necessity to be different, to differentiate, to be careful in respect of anti-Semitism or other form of hate speech, of racism. What's your experience, Alana, in Durban and in your field of profession?
Absolutely. I think now more than ever, we need a new culture of memory, and we need more memory. We need to really be targeting the youth to understand and engage with the past, and to take those lessons from history and use them as a lens with which to view current issues and challenges in society. And through that process of learning and understanding, the awareness needs to translate into concrete action, because it's no good to learn historical facts and hear testimony and to keep it on a bookshelf. It needs to translate into making young people upstanders, empowering them to make a difference, whether it's in their own families or communities, and then taking it out from there into a public sphere. At the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation, we are lucky to have school groups, business and corporate, NGO and government groups coming through our workshops and engaging with the history. And we really have tried to take, whether it's Nazi Germany and the past from World War II, or our own past here in South Africa, engaging with apartheid and other events that are happening now currently in the world, and using that as tools with which to build a human rights focused future. And I think that culture of memory that deals with how young people can then go forward and be proactive is crucial at this time.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, I mean, I ask everybody in the round, and it's a question I ask myself, is denying and morally condemning still the right concept? I mean, instantly we all, I think we of course we agree, and we are living in a generation of let's say quite experienced, but and we instantly would condemn anti-Semitic voice by nature, basically. But I'm not quite sure if that concept still works with a generation who is very different or lives very different in a different area, in a different time, who does not have this kind of memories and not this kind of, let's say, also experience. So my question to everybody is wouldn't it be more efficient also in a way to use or to address and challenge attitudes openly, maybe? And to clarify a little bit my thinking is that I was quite shocked, not shocked in a sense of negative feelings, but quite or impressed how fast Me Too had an impact in respect, if you look at how long it took for pro-feministic political correctness to succeed. So is that this kind of, let's say, shocking and this kind of also provoking a more efficient way to deal with the phenomena?
I think, could I say a word?
Yes, sure. Father,
yes.
please.
Because I think exactly that this teaching way to show we are moral superior than this conspiracy people, I think that's totally the contra effect, because often the people feel as victims, feel as underdogs against the system, and then if the system teach them that's the right fact, they feel really, that's the point, because I'm touching a sensitive point, so the system explain me how it is right. And of course, there's another thing. If you want to provoke, if you want to be heard, if you want to have a wave as a person, maybe totally, in the shadow, then if you do hate speech, you earn reactions, you earn provocative things. And I think this is also like a kick, like a little bit an adrenaline push. And I think that's totally contrafact. I think what works, it's not to respond to this person, you are bad, you are moral inferior, what you're saying, this is a taboo, because I think that's not the way, but to debunk the facts, to say, okay, you're a little bit silly, you're a little bit, that's not right what you're saying. So for example, on TikTok, it's a very new media. There are, videos very crisp, very short from hate speech. And there are people who watching this video and commenting directly. For example, one is saying that and the other say, no, it's like that. Or question, really, that's it? And the result is the hate speecher looks silly. He looks as an idiot. And because I think that's the point, that often this hate speech preachers looks very cool, looks very, young, cool, fresh, short, on the point. And I think with the same language, if you debunk them, this for me has more effect than with a lot of money to make very professional videos to show that are the real facts, because I think it's a contra result.
If I could jump in for a moment.
Please, Rabbi Lippman, please.
I think there are 2 points that I want to make. One is it's hard to, from my perspective, to debunk someone who is willing to believe that the Jews are out to control the world and we're in control of all the money. It's hard to engage in that conversation from my perspective. However, people don't want to be in the camp of hating others or racism or discrimination. Most people will say racism is wrong. That's why, for example, when the Black Lives Matter movement really took off in the United States in the last few months, and then we saw some of the leaders that were involved, and some of the spokespeople that had some anti-Semitic statements that were made, it was critical to point out, and there were a lot of celebrities who helped with this, especially in the sports world, that you can't fight against racism and also support anti-Semitism. To show that hatred against a group of people is a hatred against a group of people, and discrimination is discrimination, and you have to show the parallel between the two, because most people do not want to be in the camp of I'm discriminatory or I'm racist. And if you show that anti-Semitism is a form of racism, that goes a long way. That's point one. Point number two, though, which is on a certain level the elephant in the room, and that is we cannot remove the issue of Israel from the equation. I know that's not our topic for the panel. I don't want to get sidetracked by it, but we do have to realize that there's a world that we live in where, of course, people can criticize Israel just like anyone can criticize any country. But there's a line that's often crossed where it's just outright anti-Israel bias, where it's not legitimate, reasonable criticism, and it's masked as being anti-Israel, but it actually is an anti-Semitism. I've been in discussions all around the world, and it took me a while to come to that conclusion. But in the world today, being anti-Israel might be politically correct, but being anti-Semitic is not. And we're seeing a growing movement of anti-Israel where the real sentiment behind it is anti-Semitism. And that has to be exposed as well, because you can tell people, criticize any country you want. Of course, that's legitimate. You can disagree with the policies. But whether you're right-wing or left-wing, the Jewish people have a right to a state. They have a right to some element of this land. And the movement to totally delegitimize that and to remove them from this land, that has to be exposed for the anti-Semitism that it is.
I think,
Roger, please.
The problem is more general, and it's more difficult. Marcus, you have been editor-in-chief of a very serious newspaper, and you realize you don't reach younger readers anymore, and public broadcasters don't reach public young readers or viewers. So you don't reach them with the information. They are not interested. They are more interested in trash content. They get a lot of that in the internet, and of course that's why if we'd like to inform them, or we'd like to educate them, it's very, very difficult. They're just not interested to get the basic information about history, sociology, etc. And everybody in the media world is doesn't have an answer. How do we reach young people with serious content? And there is no answer around. And that's, of course, opens the door for people who spread conspiracy theories, because people are not educated. They fall for these very strange stories and think it's interesting to find the truth behind the truth. And we do some personal research like QAnon. They trick these people into feeling that they have learned something by themselves, because they don't have basic information about what happened in the last 100 or 200 years in the world.
You mentioned now again that the younger generation is not reachable by, let's say, this kind of classical information or this kind of also education. But Alana, when I listened to you, I got the feeling that you are quite optimistic that there are ways and means to address this topic also in a language or in a form which is understandable for a generation who is not who lives in different times for obvious reasons. So my question would be again to everybody of the panel: is it really a problem of the youth, so to say, anti-Semitism, or is it just a problem of, let's say, mankind, but the youth is maybe more confronted with it because they use more this kind of media which helps to promote anti-Semitism in a very radical, in a very easy, in a very anonymous, in a very globally way. Because my thought is, it's not the youth who is electing President Trump, for example, although he is tweeting every day a lot of really nonsense and so to say also things which are not correct, not in any sense correct.
But the young people don't vote for him in large numbers because they are ashamed of him. Because that's not presidential. That has nothing to do with anti-Semitism or not. Even if he's racist and all these things come together, he's a liar, he's a misogynist and all these things, they're ashamed of him. Anti-Semitism plays a role, but that's not at the center of the discussion.
There's no doubt, though, that you were talking before about how to reach the younger people. There's so many creative ways. I mean, Roger was saying how in the traditional ways you won't get to them. I know that certainly in our organization, Honest Reporting, we have younger people who understand how the videos work, how to reach people, different mechanisms of getting people information, even if it's not in a traditional, here, I'm going to sit down now and lecture you about it. We're reaching over 20 million viewers over the course of this year in the age of 18 to 34 in very specific areas. That's the way you have to do it. And there are many organizations that are out there doing so. My dream is that all can work together. Can you imagine if everyone with all of their audiences got together, and not just Jewish organizations, but organizations throughout the world, Christian organizations and others that all support this effort. If we work together with our resources and got messages out in the, the 30-second video and the 1-minute videos and just hammered home the same way, we could be very effective, but we're not doing it in a strategic manner at the moment.
But Rabbi Lippman, to come back to what you said a couple minutes ago, or did I got it incorrectly? You also advocate, let's say, more tough stance against platforms distributing this kind of content.
Absolutely. So, on the one hand, a strong, unified battle, a legal battle against these platforms to make sure that they are removing the content, they have a clear definition of anti-Semitism, and they follow it, and they're monitoring it, and they're making sure that it's removed. We can't have a situation where, for example, where Twitter allows the leader of Iran to tweet about the annihilation of destruction of Israel, which is outright anti-Semitism, no matter how you spin it, and yet other people are not allowed to print other things. Today, a member of Knesset, tried to tweet about a humanitarian issue with prisoners that are in captivity in Hamas, and that wasn't allowed. We have to fight against that on the one hand. On the other hand, a very proactive educational approach, but one that meets the needs of the 21st century, meets the attention span and the interests of the younger generation.
What about the First Amendment and free speech in America? You are entitled in the States, in Switzerland, in Europe, it's different, to every opinion. Of course, if you promote falsehoods, if you promote things or you write things that are obviously wrong, you now can be canceled by Twitter or by Facebook. But if it's an opinion which you don't like, in America, it's protected by the Constitution.
That's one of the things that we're fighting against. In America, it took some time because the companies are in America, like you said, in Silicon Valley and California, for even things that were, let's say, detrimental to youth, things that were dangerous to youth. It took some time to fight against that to make sure that was removed. Now it's viewed as if it's dangerous, if it's going to hurt someone, we'll remove it. So we have to show that hate speech, whether it's against Jews or any other group, is in that same category and can lead people to kill and hurt other people. That's the approach that we have to take on the legal effort. But you're 100% right. It's certainly a battle against the elements of free speech.
To Alana and Father Nicodemus, I'd like to raise the question, who is the right person or the right institution to do this kind of education, this kind of bringing more sensitivity to the topic? Is Rabbi Lippman, are you, Father Nicodemus, are you the right persons, or should it be, let's say, more, not a younger one, but a different style to reach out? What's your opinion about that? Alana, maybe you can answer first.
Sure. Well, I think that there are certainly challenges with reaching the youth because they do not use traditional media. But I think that the problems we're seeing are not necessarily to do with the youth. They are, as you said, a problem for humanity in general. They are just at the forefront of using the latest technology. So that is where we are dealing with the medium and how to work with it. I think it's very important to meet the young people where they are. So to go to the apps, to go to the platforms, and to be disseminating messages around tolerance and anti-discrimination, anti-Semitism there, so that you can really be speaking and engaging with them. And in doing that, I think you need to use a combination of both the traditional sources of education, so the teachers, the professors, the community leaders that would have traditionally been speaking to the public through traditional media, and then also be harnessing the world of influencers and social media trends and leaders and giants, jumping onto hashtags that have to do with viral dances, using everything that the young people are engaging with to put forward your message and to ensure that although we do want to have freedom of speech and we want to have that upheld in democracies around the world, there is also a freedom of, with the rights of freedom of speech come responsibilities. And so the freedom of dignity and equality also needs to be upheld. So there does need to be that clear line, not of censorship, but of regulation and monitoring between the two. And also just to go back to something you said earlier, Marcus, I think absolutely speaking out boldly and directly on these issues is the way to go, just as Me Too made so much headway by boldly calling out certain forms of discrimination against women. That needs to be done for hate speech and hate crimes across the board, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, the LGBTQIA+ community. That is really where we can see some traction.
Father Nicodemus, is the Catholic Church the right ambassador for this kind of
Okay, I think if we especially pointing out the phenomenon of anti-Semitism, I think the Christian anti-Judaism has played a big role that arise. So we have to be critic. And no, I think a double answer. I think we have to do our own homework. That's for internal communication. And for example, Pope Francis is very, very clear. You can't be a Catholic, or I would say you can't be Christian and anti-Semitic. It's contradictory, and we have that to point out and to teach that internal, and yes, and to make it very, very clear. Also, you can't be Christian racist and so on, and that's clear that you are out of the community if you are a fan of that. And I think for our youth, it's very important, like vaccination. For the challenges they find in the net, in the new media, in the world, that they're really to teach what I said at the very beginning, to teach the taste of complexity, and that's good, and really and give them the facts. But this is internal. External, this is, I'm very, very critical if that works. For example, on YouTube, there are very, very excellent videos, but no clicks, because it's clear who is the channel. Catholic Church. Oh, it's clear. So why should one who's totally in that conspiracy theory watch a video from that channel? Of course not. So my experience, it's very good to go into the arena. So I'm also the best YouTube videos I have are not YouTube videos with church channels, but with other channels, and I'm the alien in that. But this was very successful because people say, okay, that's not now a church channel, but he as an alien, it's giving a Q&A, and I think that's the way. If you really want to fight against anti-Semitism, racism, you have not to build a very excellent channel who's clear, okay, it's a Jewish organization, it's a Catholic, or okay, the people don't don't go to that channel because it's clear they don't trust this channel. No, you have to go really to the arena of the influencers and to say, okay, let's make a Q&A.
Yeah, very good. Roger, last question to you, because you are the most experienced journalist and media entrepreneur on this panel. Rabbi Lippman and also Alana were advocating a little bit tough stance against platforms. Do you also see need for more media regulation?
Of course. I mean, Facebook, they have such a big power, and we have seen it in 2016 during the last election in the United States. Not everything has come out, but it was obvious that Putin and Russia subverted and tried to manipulate the election. And this is going to happen again. Everybody knows that. And of course, all these things have to be regulated. I mean, it's very difficult. We talked about first speech, First Amendment, free speech and First Amendment. But also in America, and especially in Europe, we have to find the boundary where we say this is not allowed. This shouldn't happen, and maybe should be prosecuted. And in Switzerland, you cannot libel people easily. We have those laws, and they should be enacted, especially in the internet, where there is a wild, wild west still happening. and where a lot of people are meeting, and we don't even know who they are, and there are certain communities totally out of the public arena, and we really should be more careful about it. Yes, I'm sure.
Okay, so thank you very much to everybody. Alana in Durban, Rabbi Littman in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem. I'm not quite sure where you live, but...
Beit Shemesh, a suburb of Jerusalem.
Okay. Father Nicodemus in Jerusalem, and Roger here in Zurich for this lively debate. I have to apologize, Ksenia Svetlova, who had to leave earlier this panel. Thank you very much. I think we got a lot of fruitful insights, a lot of, let's say, good advice, also some pessimism, but also some optimism. So I think that rounded it quite good up today, and I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you very much. Keep safe and healthy, and all the best to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wow, Marcos, thank you so much. It was such an interesting panel, such an interesting discussion, where we heard so many different perspectives on anti-Semitism and hate speech. And we hope that you enjoyed our first day of the summit.
Congratulations also from my side to the moderator, Markus Spielmann, and all the panelists. I'm very... I have so many things to think about, but for today we are finishing. We hope that you join us tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to listen to the foreign ministers, and the Bertelsmann Stiftung will present their survey, Europe and Israel, Insights into Their Mutual Perceptions. So have a good night.
Yes, we have an interesting program.
Laila Tov.
Yes. And
so see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Bye.